Okay, so this two lectures will look at the changes in patterns of oil production and consumption. First of all, we'll look at the general trends in oil production. Then we'll have a talk about peak oil and the TOK fallacies that are behind the theory of peak oil. So first of all, let's have a look at this graph. This graph, as you can see, goes up to about 2003. Your job is to find more recent figures that talk about the regional production of oil. You can see that actually the production of oil hasn't increased very much from 1990 to 2002. This brings us on to the next slide, which looks at the global consumption of oil. And you can see that there is a greater increase in oil consumption, there's a greater growth in oil consumption than there is in the oil production. In particular, you can see there's a lot of growth from 1990 to 2002 in the Far East and Oceania, and that's our part of the world, and a lot of that will be due to the Asian tigers, economic tigers, very high double-digit growth for the last 10 years or so. This has led on to a concept of peak oil, and that is that eventually, with supply not being able to keep pace with demand, so they looked at individual wells, and when you look at an individual well, you start your well, you start pumping out the oil. As you find the oil, the amount of oil produced reaches the maximum quantity. Then from that, you've used up all the oil and it starts to decline. So they've taken this concept of from individual oils and applied it to the whole industry. And they said that as we start using up all of the oil, production will actually decline. You get a double whammy because at the same time the demand for oil is increasing. So eventually you will reach a situation where supply cannot keep pace with demand because supply is falling because of the peak oil concept and demand is increasing due to economic growth. I'll let you watch these videos. There's two. There's a video about Mad Max, which is kind of about peak oil. It says what are the consequences of peak oil, and then there's a nice little video to help us to understand visually the concept of peak oil. Of course, you'll know that here we're really going back to those classic debates, the limits to growth models. We've talked about that, and we'll talk about the classic Elric and Simon arguments and the neo-Malthusian and anti-Malthusians. So moving on, I mean, what you have to remember is when looking at peak oil, there are some things. It's never been reached before, and they've said time and time again, by X year, peak oil will be reached and be in a lot of trouble. We haven't got there yet. So as you can see, this is really starting to look like the Paul Simon and Elric debate about resources. Remember, as those higher oil prices, they enable new technology to be used. They push the industry into finding new reserves of oil, and the reserves of oil that were not economically viable in the past are now economically viable because you can afford to exploit those oil reserves that are more difficult, more expensive. We're starting to have alternative sources of energy. In particular, the one that you'll see at the moment is fracking, but also renewables. Again, this is stimulated by government policy and also by you actually pushing it so the new energy resources are actually viable because of the high cost that people are prepared to pay for energy. Again, moving on to about the 2050, you would question whether or not we'd actually reach the situation of peak oil because population growth is starting to slow down, and actually we've got population decline from about 2050 onwards. High prices, as we said before, drive efficiency. You can see that with many of the cars, we're actually becoming more efficient. What we've noticed in the past few years is that more economically developed countries, their oil consumption is actually decreasing. Now, there are a number of reasons for this. Of course, that they're offshoring some of their manufacturing industries. But also there is this question of efficiency. It's becoming more efficient, and the high prices are dissuading people from consuming a lot of oil. Either way, you can see here that we can apply the classic concept of an S-curve and a J-curve. So I'd like to talk about these fallacies and the TOK. Then I'll let you have a read of what a fallacy is. There's a definition of a fallacy. and I'd like you to have and we're going to have a think about the TOK concept of fallacies and try to apply 3 of these to the peak oil. You might want to pause this video and go back again and have a look at the peak oil videos so you can understand what we're going to talk about. Okay, I hope you've paused that video and watched the videos, again on peak oil. So we're now going to go in and look at the fallacies. If you didn't pause the video, I'd encourage you strongly to do so, to look at the concept again of peak oil, especially the cartoon. So the first one we're going to talk about is that it appeals to the people. Cartoon is a very good example of that. They've made it visual, they've made it easy to see, and it's something that appeals to people's fears. People will be able to see this, and underneath they know they've heard about it before. So when this is presented to them, people say it will seem common sense, and it will appear logical. So that's appealing to the people. Emotion. Remember, initially peak oil just talked about the balance of supply and demand for oil, but it's got tangled up with emotional thing. If peak oil is ever reached, there will be political disasters, there'll be an environmental disaster, a Mad Max scenario. You do need to be scared of this because it challenges the quality of life that you're going to have, or even more so, the quality of life that your children are going to have. So there you can see that the concept of peak oil has been reinforced by the fallacy of appealing to people's emotion. Related to this is the slippery slope fallacy. The concept of peak oil never actually said that there would be a Mad Max scenario. What it said was there will be a point in time when supply outstrips demand. Yet we've got onto the whole slippery slope of saying the world is going to descend into political and socio-economic chaos. Again, of course, this is related to appealing to the people and appealing to the people's emotion. So I'd like you to pause, maybe click on the fallacy link. That will take you to the website where it talks about fallacies, and there may be other fallacies there that you can apply to this concept. Doom and gloom. Even if peak oil is reached, and there's no suggestion, actually, there's nothing in the statistics to say that it might be reached. Even if it reached, does it matter? Are we all automatically going to have that worst case scenario of political and socio-economic and environmental instability? There are, of course, other scenarios. As we reach peak oil, the cleaner alternatives for energy will be found. Innovation and substitution and efficiency are a good example of this, and they're already happening. Market forces, as we say, and high prices increase efficiency, so in total consumption will go down. There are other technologies that are becoming available to us, and at the moment one of the big ones is fracking, but also the exploitation of shale sands. This could be a real game changer and mean that we're very, very unlikely, if we choose to follow the fracking route, that we'll actually reach the peak oil scenario. Of course, the one that does appeal to popular culture is that Mad Max scenario. Society degrades into a Mad Max scenario, things go wrong, people start fighting over oil. This historically has happened with resources in the past, but just because wars have broken out and society has degraded and completely collapsed because of lack of resources and over competition resources, doesn't necessarily mean that it will happen again. So here we start seeing historical fallacy creeping in. Before we go on to the next lecture, just like to remind you that we are going to look at patterns and changes. Pattern is a change over a pattern. It is